So David, let me, Bill and Jessica and then Marla gave an overview of all the biologics and then especially focus on Crohn's, but ustekinumab in ulcerative colitis and the UNIFI study, looking at some of the results. What's your overall gestalt? What's your feeling about the study results? Maybe talk to us about those, kind of some of your take-home messages with ustekinumab for ulcerative colitis.
Well, ustekinumab was the first in class of its kind for ulcerative colitis. This, again, is an anti-P40 antibody that ends up targeting two cytokines, IL-12 and 23. And after its approval for moderate to severe Crohn's in 2016, it was approved for ulcerative colitis, moderately to severely active UC in 2019. And it offers a new treatment option for us. The UNIFI study published in the New England Journal of Medicine looked at both induction of remission as well as maintenance. And it was an 8-week induction study that looked at weight-based IV dosing, a single dose, versus a stable dose of 130 milligrams compared to placebo. And of patients who responded after that initial single IV dose, they were randomized to placebo or subcutaneous dosing of 90 milligrams every 8 or every 12 weeks. And what the UNIFI study demonstrated was that patients who received either the 130 milligram dose or the weight-based dosing IV were more likely to achieve remission than placebo, about 15.5%. And those who responded then, who went on to the maintenance study at 1 year, whether they got every 12-week or every 8-week sub-Q 90 milligrams, they were more likely to be in remission at the end of a year compared to placebo, with the 8-week interval being more favorable numerically than the 12-week interval. So the drug got approved for the single IV loading dose that's weight-based, and then 8-week subcutaneous dosing of 90 milligrams. This is an option for our patients. Because it's a different mechanism. In the clinical trial, there were patients who were already TNF experienced and those who were TNF naive. And similar to many of the messages with other therapies, patients who have not already failed TNF do better. So it suggests that choosing this therapy earlier in some patients would be more likely to get you the response you need. It offers the convenience of an injectable therapy at every 8-week interval. The real world experience has held up. The safety of the drug was similar to placebo, as Bill already alluded to. And very interestingly, there's very low immunogenicity with this therapy, such that we can feel comfortable administering it as a monotherapy. It offers a new mechanism for many of our patients with UC. I particularly like this therapy in my patients who are either needing a more convenient strategy for different particular reasons, but also a patient who has a history of psoriasis. This is also approved for that indication. It's a wonderful option for skin, and I found it to be useful. We've published our real world experience that about 20% of the patients in our center at the University of Chicago needed to go to every month injection, and that seemed to capture many of the patients with some dose adjustments. And it's been a very practical and helpful addition to our armamentarium in UC.
Great. And then actually, David, maybe before I leave that study, because I want to ask you this and then Marla the same question, there was this new endpoint,
Sure.
This histoendoscopic mucosal improvement, HEMI. Tell us about that, and then also what does that mean to you in your practice?
Well, a standard endpoint in ulcerative colitis trials for many years now has been a secondary endpoint of what was previously called mucosal healing and now more accurately is called endoscopic improvement. And that, of course, looks at the improvement of the mucosa through the colonoscope or a flex sig, and usually now done by a standardized reader. But the FDA, and frankly all of us, have been interested in whether that's an adequate measure of the mucosal inflammation or healing. And in the UNIFI study, Janssen designed it to include a novel endpoint called histoendoscopic mucosal healing, which not only included the component of how it looks endoscopically, but also defined histologic remission as less than 5% neutrophils per high-powered field on biopsies. And in fact, and maybe not surprisingly, but very interestingly, when you look at the histoendoscopic mucosal healing with ustekinumab, both the maintenance dosing achieved that greater than placebo. And of course, of great interest is whether having histological remission in addition to endoscopic improvement leads to better outcomes than either one alone. And Bill's looked at that subset, and there's now a manuscript in press that has described some of that. So it's of great interest to us because we all believe that what's going on below the surface may be more important in predicting outcomes. And we certainly recognize that histology is most directly correlated to subsequent neoplasia. So that may be something more that we're going to look at in the future. Histology is not yet a therapeutic target. We shouldn't be treating to histology, but we should still certainly appreciate what its value is when you see that there's persistent histological activity, or conversely, when you achieve histological remission.
Great.
David, I wanted to just add one thing around the extraintestinal manifestation. So we've made the case that ustekinumab is quite good for dermatologic indications. TNF blockers are also not bad for psoriasis and pyoderma.
Sure.
I think ustekinumab is maybe just a little better. But if you have arthritis, ustekinumab doesn't help much. And, you know, it wasn't effective in spondylar arthropathies and ankylosing spondylitis. So TNF blockers and JAK inhibitors are good for arthritis. If you have multiple sclerosis, TNF blockers are relatively contraindicated. Ustekinumab actually didn't cause harm, so that's better than a TNF blocker. So I think you can use ustekinumab in a patient with multiple sclerosis or a history of demyelination, but you're going to need a separate therapy for the MS, and then you got to make sure that the sum total of the toxicities are acceptable. In a future world, and with vedolizumab, you can gut with vedolizumab and then let the neurologists do whatever they want for the multiple sclerosis because of the safety profile of vedolizumab. If in a future world, we might use the small molecule S1P1 modulators, which would cover MS and IBD. So anyway, I sort of think it's interesting how we really leverage these different classes of drugs in the subset of patients who have extraintestinal manifestation.
Yeah, I think that's an important point, Bill. I would say that in the absence of therapeutic biomarkers that help us know which mechanism to use, being thoughtful about comorbid illnesses and extraintestinal manifestations should guide us. Not just because we know the drug may work, but I think it provides insight into what the pathogenesis might be in that individual patient. So it's very interesting stuff.
Yeah, and we'll get into positioning in a minute, but obviously I think you just mentioned the comorbidities, the extraintestinal manifestations, the age. There are a lot of factors.